Hey, welcome to my table. My name is Daniel Stomball, and I'm just a guy who's identified how loved and adored I am by God. It is my passion and my purpose to help everyone I meet understand their value and their place in the kingdom of God. And so we're going through the Solomon Song. It's a 90-day devotional that's based entirely out of the Song of Solomon. It's a 90-day journey of God's expressed desire for our heart. And today we're on day number 19, and the title of our devotion is called The Ultimate Relationship Test. And so just to kind of set the scene for what we're going to look at, we just backtrack a couple videos in. And if you were here for the last video, you saw this graphic picture of the king making love to the shepherd girl. And it was very there was a lot of methods that he was employing in that love-making session. And it was a beautiful picture that was created there. So we're going to pick up right after that has happened. And so they've made love together, and then the king has fallen asleep. No surprise, right? So, Song of Solomon chapter 2 and verse number 7 is where we pick up, and she makes this statement. Now, you got to see, I'm going to read it and then point out a couple things that you may miss just in the initial reading. So she says this, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. It's Song of Solomon 2, 7, day number 19 in your devotional book. She says, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the fields, that ye stir not up, nor awake my love, till he please. Now, just back up here. I want to draw your attention to the very first three words of this passage, because those first three words are very revealing about what has taken place in her heart because of the times that she has felt the king move with her. The times that they have been together, what he's expressed to her so far. Now, we're just in chapter 2 of this book, and by the time you get to chapter number 8, you're not even going to recognize this girl. By the time you get to your journey with God, where you have established in your heart your understood identity in him, and by the time you get to the place in your life where you can look back and your approval and your affirmation, your love comes from him as your source, you're no longer living for Jesus. Okay? The greatest day in my life was when I stopped living for Jesus. You know, God never intended me to live for him. He intended me to live from him. There's a difference between living for someone's love and living from the fact that you're loved. There's a difference between living for affirmation and living from the fact that you've been affirmed. There's a difference between living for Jesus, and there's a difference of living from him as your source. The disciples said in the New Testament, in him we move and we live and we breathe and we have our very beings. We're wrapped up in him. And I love that. I'm living from him as my day-to-day source of righteousness. I live from him as my source of affirmation and love. I live from him as my strength and my source for that strength. And so she's making a statement. She says, I charge you. This is a command. Now, the same girl that was saying, I'm not worthy to be in the palace, is now this girl that's giving this command to the palace staff. She's saying, I command you, do not wake him up. You see, she had just experienced love with the king, and the very last face that he saw before he drifted off into a peaceful sleep was her face looking into his. It was the last thing that he saw. The last thing that he was coherently aware of was her breath. The last thing he felt was her body moving and breathing with him. That's the last thing that he felt and that he heard and that he saw. And she was determined by heaven and earth to be the very first thing that he saw when he woke up. She's like, I was the last thing that he saw, and I will be the first thing that he saw. I was the last thing that he felt in his arms and he was aware of, and the sense of touch was aware of my body in his hands, and I will be the very first thing that he feels when he wakes up. I will be the very first thing that he sees when he wakes up. My face, my eyes, my lips, I will be the very first thing that he sees, and I'm going to be the very first voice that he hears. And so she is giving a command to everyone else in the palace. She says, I charge you, do not disturb him. You let him sleep, and don't you dare wake him up. This is a growth that just took place in her journey. And now she was at the point where she was convinced that she had some level of authority from the king. And when you start to make moves in your identity as a child of God, as someone who is righteous, your righteousness was secured on the cross. Romans says that you were given peace, made peace with God through the sacrifice of Christ. You have been made royalty. Colossians says you are complete in him. There is no more lack in you. There's nothing you have to learn 6 ways to be a better bride to God. No, you are complete in him, in the finished work of Calvary. And so you stand complete, and you have authority in the name of Christ to move. You have authority in the name of Christ to breathe and to operate and to navigate this spiritual life that you're in, to navigate this journey. And so you stop taking a Clark Kent attitude towards the things of God and start stepping up into your God-given role as the Superman. Start stepping up in your God-given role as someone who has authority given to you by the King of Kings. I love it. So she says, do not wake him up. You let him sleep. She knew her value to the king. She knew it. And she was confident in him being able to rest because she knew when she woke up who she was to him. She wasn't afraid of losing status and losing stature in his sleep. It's like, I'm confident in who I am to him. He's expressed love to her twice that we've read about so far, and this is just the tip of the iceberg here. But in those encounters with him, she began to establish her identity. Anytime you and I encounter God in the sense that he moves in our life, we feel him actively moving and see him actively at work in our life, that emboldens you and that it strengthens your understanding of your value to him. Anytime God operates through you and he conduits through your life to the life of someone else, you walk away from that encounter going, man, I know that I have value to God. I know that because I'm his vessel, and I know that. The ultimate test of any relationship is, are we at rest? There's nothing worse than a relationship that is packed with drama. I mean, everything is an issue. It's draining emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, all the other Le's, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, whatever. It is a drain. Activity without purpose is a drain. It's a drain on your finances. It's a drain on your spirit. It's the people in your life. There's no purpose in that activity. It is a drain. And a relationship without a purpose is a drain. It says, man, are we at rest? Every time we experience God's touch in our life, it deepens our understanding of our true position in his eyes and in his heart. We no longer have to strive to bring value to him. We can be at rest in the relationship with him. The value to him was provided by God himself, and there is nothing we can do to add or take away from that provided value. We are at rest. I love that. Here's my question. What can you do today that could undo what God did for you to make you his? What is it that today that you could possibly hope to do that would undo the blood that he shed for you on the cross? I want to challenge you. Sometimes we think, well, if I don't do this many activities with my church, then I'm no longer of value. God will put me on the shelf. I remember talking to a guy several years back. He said that, I asked him how he was doing. He's like, yeah, I'm in God's goodwill. And I said, what is that? He said, well, God is a perfect and acceptable and a good will. He said, the perfect will was that God had for me to be a pastor. And then he said, I kind of screwed that up. And he said, so then I was in God's acceptable will. And then he said, I screwed that up. And so now I'm just getting back in church, and I'm in his goodwill. And I'm thinking, I didn't know God had a thrift store. God doesn't have thrift stores for people because God never puts people on the shelf. We have this mentality that says if I'm not busy, inactivity means unproductivity. That's not true. You don't have to be busy for God in order for God to find value in you. There's nothing you can do to ever impress him. The only thing that impresses him, the Bible tells us in the book of Romans, was that triumphal entry was the only thing that pleased God was the smell of the savor of his Son on our life. That's the only thing that brings pleasure to God about us, is that the fact that we have been redeemed, that he gave us our value. Our value to him has been given because of the blood of Christ. And so that's been established. There's nothing you and I can do to make God stop what he's doing and applaud us and say, man, good job, kiddo. God doesn't do that. He says your value, any good job, kiddo, was provided to you by the cross. Now, whether or not you spend the next 60 years of your life, or 30 years, or 20 years, or 10 years of life with me, working with me, and living with me in life, and enjoying life with me, that's up to you. You can miss out on me while you're here, but you have this tremendous opportunity while your faith is not sight to live your life with me and for us to do this life together. Let me teach you about yourself. Let me teach you about life. Let me teach you about me. Let me teach you about our relationship. Let God do those things for you. There's nothing you can do that would jeopardize your position with Christ. It's been given to you through the blood of Jesus on the cross. So you're at rest with him. The ultimate test of any relationship is there any rest in this thing? Or do I'm always fearful that maybe I can do something to botch it up? I'm always fearful that this is going to be, if I live on pins and needles, fear is a short-term motivator. And after a while, we just give up. Say, there's nothing I can do. As a teenager, I think I just gave up because I knew me and I knew how I must be disappointing God at every step of the way. And since I couldn't please him, why even try? Why even try? The truth is there was no rest in that relationship because I truly didn't understand the heart of the Father for me. He was the Godfather, not God the Father. But when I met him, it all changed. So I challenge you today to be at rest with God. Be at rest in the fact that you are who he says you are to him. He has done what he said he's going to do with you. And he is going to do what he said he's going to do in your life and with you. That's today. So the next time we get together, we're going to be talking about when God calls us. I just called to say I love you. When God calls us, what does it look like when God tells us throughout the day that he loves us? How do we see that? How do you recognize that? Because once you start to learn to recognize the love calls from God, your days change. Everything about the day changes when you start to be able to recognize just how many times God calls you throughout the day to tell you that he loves you. Can't wait for you to see that. Thanks for being with me today. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.